Hey guys, welcome back to Check Your Leader TV, and today we're going to be continuing with a series of videos on tactical advice when playing General d'Armée version 2. In my last video I did mention that if it was well received that I might produce more videos like this, and it seems to have gone down pretty well. So with that in mind, let's continue with the number 2 video in this series, tactical tips for playing General d'Armée version 2. I should add, I guess some of these tips might transfer to other rule systems. I try not to. I'm trying not to offer advice that is exclusive to GDA2. I hope the kind of stuff I'm providing you could use if you're playing Black Powder or Soldiers of Napoleon or whatever Napoleonic rule system you're using. It is pitched predominantly at brigade/divisional level. So if they're the types of rules you're using, then hopefully this will be applicable. But obviously there are mechanics in different rule systems where what I'm suggesting is irrelevant. So with that in mind, we'll go and get into it. I've just had a crown put in at the dentist, so my right-hand side of my mouth is somewhat numb, but hopefully I'll be able to speak relatively clearly. So let's get on with it. Okay, so we're going to be using the same setup I did in the last video. Obviously, I could set up an entire table with my 28mm miniatures on it and go through it step by step, but I just think it's for illustrative purposes. I think it's handy using this Command and Colors Napoleonic board game setup to just illustrate the ideas that I'm trying to get across. Again, each one of these blocks represents a base of miniatures. So for example, these 4 bases here represents a battalion in GDA, another battalion here, another battalion here, another battalion here. This is a brigade, obviously, with their artillery to the front and their brigade skirmish line out the front. Same here, another 4 battalions, a brigade skirmish line, a battery. These are the French, and in this scenario, they're attacking a Russian division that is deployed. They've got 1 brigade of infantry here with a battery, another brigade here, and another brigade here with a battery. This battery's on the high ground. We have a built-up area here, a built-up area here, and a built-up area here. We're not going to worry too much what the scenario is. It's just, let's just say it's a battle. Obviously, there's a wood here as well, and you can see the Russians have got a brigade skirmish line in there. And then there's this high ground here, which the French are using to position their artillery so they can fire at extended range, because they want to get that extra range to bombard their enemy as they go forward. So that's the scenario. That's the setup. The table, let's pretend it's a 6x4 and we're using 15mm miniatures. And what we have here is each one of these hexes represents approximately 6 inches. So you get the rough idea of where we're at. And so in the last video, I talked about attacking on a narrow frontage, artillery in the attack, and the appropriate use of reserves, maintaining a reserve. And more broadly, I talked about getting a localized numerical superiority and why that was important in a battle. Okay, so in today's video, what we're going to do is we're going to be a little bit more granular in our discussions about artillery. So what we're going to talk about first is the foot artillery, or better known as field artillery. Now, when employing field artillery, like I alluded to in the first video, in the attack, you should decide before you start your battle, are you going to concentrate on attacking the enemy's artillery, or are you going to concentrate on attacking with your artillery those troops in which your main effort is directed against? So for example, in this scenario, these batteries here, assuming the brigade skirmish line has moved out of line of fire, are these batteries here going to bombard the infantry, preparing the way for your infantry to drive them away, or are they going to bombard the enemy artillery in an effort to drive that away? There are 2 things to consider here. One is, if you decide to drive off the enemy artillery, what that enables is your infantry to get towards the enemy infantry without being molested by the combined weight of artillery, skirmishes, and then volleys. What you're essentially doing by destroying the enemy artillery first is you're taking them out of the equation. The advantage of artillery is that it can reach out and hit the enemy at range. We've got to remember, volleys are only, and I'm going to use the 28 millimeter ranges here because I play predominantly 28 millimeter, but infantry volleys are only going to be 9 inches. Skirmishes are going to be firing out to 12, and artillery is, canister at 12, and beyond that, it's going to either be standard or inferior fire. So there is, between your jumping off point or your line of departure and finally coming into contact with your enemy, there are layers of indirect, well, my previous life is creeping in here. There are layers of fire support that you're going to have to endure. So as your infantry or cavalry or whatever it is moving forward, first they'll come under artillery fire. As they approach the skirmishes, they'll come under skirmish fire. As the skirmishes give ground, they'll now come under skirmish and canister fire. And eventually they'll come under volley fire. So the attacking columns have to endure a lot to get onto the objective. By driving away the artillery, you're taking that layer away. You're taking away the possibility of receiving inferior artillery fire, and then standard artillery fire, and then canister fire. So that's a worthy task for your guns to do, to silence enemy artillery before they go in. Now, the other option, of course, is if you decide to pour your fire onto the infantry, what that might do is it might create a situation where the infantry that you're targeting might be destroyed by the artillery fire before you even arrive. So let's just do a quick experiment here. Let's say that we have these 2 batteries engaging this battery, and we're going to do it for 3 turns. So 3 turns of consistent artillery fire on that battery. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a pair of green dice, a pair of white dice, and a pair of grey dice. That will represent 1 battery firing 3 turns, and let's see how many hits we can do in 3 turns. So this is just standard fire from 1 battery. So we've got a 7, we've got a 6, and we've got a 6. Now it's inferior fire, so it's long range, so no hits, and 1. So that's 1 hit so far. Now we're going to do it, the other battery's going to throw in its fire as well. Wow, we've got an 11. So we've got 1, 2, 3, and an 11 inferior is going to be another 2. So that's going to be 4 hits. So that's 4 hits. Now, if one of those batteries was consistently firing artillery assault throughout that entire exchange, 4, 5, 6. 6 hits after 3 rounds of fire. So that enemy battery is going to be worn. Actually, quick review of the mathematics. That's actually 7 hits on this battery. Actually, so they're going to be worn. And that also, they would have been compelled to take a discipline test somewhere in amongst that. And assuming that happened early in the fight, well, they'll probably pass it. But the fact remains, that's more pressure being applied to this battery. Now, that's basically firing with these guys basically sitting back and not doing much else. Obviously, the skirmish lines would be going forward. They'll be doing their business. And you might wonder, okay, that's 3 turns. What else am I doing in that case? Well, these guys might not be going forward because that might be your primary attack force, but that wouldn't prevent these guys advancing. And so you have this brigade here pressuring the built-up area, which is placing more command stress on this brigade. And you've got a battalion from this brigade here advancing with their brigade skirmish screen to place some pressure on this brigade here by skirmishing with their light infantry in the woods. So 3 turns have passed. These guys have got 7 casualties on them. Obviously, they had caissons available to them, so they could be feeding caissons into this battery here. Regardless, as these guys go forward and they get into their fight here, this battery is still free to engage this battery here. And so that's more hurt being applied to this battery. Obviously, during all this battery would be returning fire, but here's the problem for them. Do they engage your batteries, or do they engage the infantry that are advancing to threaten this built-up area? So what we see here is artillery is not only being used to attrit the enemy, but it's also being used to put command stress on a particular brigade. And simultaneously, by putting command stress on the infantry, maybe tempting this brigade commander to maybe use a skirmish order so his garrison can fire out more effectively here. At the same time, putting command stress on this brigade, maybe he's going to need to use a skirmish order to help these guys deal with these. Because this brigade here, as soon as they lose a base, could easily break this battalion up into, by giving it the skirmish order, either reinforce the skirmish brigade, or if they're veteran quality, maybe even break them into an independent light infantry battalion to help out with the skirmish fight on this woods here. So what I'm trying to suggest here is at no point is all this happening in isolation. What you're attempting to do is put as much command pressure on the enemy as you possibly can. And what the artillery is doing here is not only attriting the enemy, but placing command pressure on them. By putting a lot of hits on this, this commander here has to start thinking about sending caissons to enable this battery to stay in the fight. But you're not going to commit a caisson to a brigade that you're not also committing an ADC to, in all probability, because if the brigade goes hesitant, it can't get the caisson. Now, let's just assume for a moment that you as the artillery commander for the French decided that, no, I'm not going to engage in counter battery fire. What I'm going to do is I'm going to engage in prepping the objective of my assault. Now, obviously, it won't be the BUA, and we'll talk about why you don't shoot at BUAs shortly. But beforehand, let's just move that onto these guys here. Now, in this situation, that's not too bad a scenario. These guys are definitely going to be pretty shot up and worn by the time you arrive with your infantry on them. Because, again, as they step off, they can move in a way that enables a channel of fire for this battery to keep firing at the target. The problem, however, by doing this is if the enemy has been smart and hasn't deployed in this way, if he's deployed in this formation, what that enables him to do is, as you approach, this worn infantry battalion could retire to the second line. So there's that. But if he is deployed in just a single line, well, maybe that's worthwhile. That said, though, that leaves your assaulting infantry to endure a lot of fire on the way in. And if he does have a second line, what that means is by the time your infantry gets there, if you can do 7 hits to him, he might be able to do 7 hits to you as you go forward. Bearing in mind, as you go forward, you're now going to be coming under, starting off receiving inferior artillery fire, then standard or normal artillery fire, and then canister fire, plus all the fire from the skirmishes as you go forward. So for me, in the attack, I think it's better to drive off the enemy artillery first. If you can do that, if you can drive them off, there's nothing then stopping you from switching your fire to help prepare the way by bombarding the infantry. So that's artillery in the attack. A little bit more granular than the last video, but that's why I recommend using artillery in the attack to destroy the enemy ability to interfere with your assault first. Remember, the role of artillery is to establish such firepower supremacy on the battlefield that the enemy can neither effectively conduct his own maneuvers, and also it prevents him from interfering with your maneuvers. So that's the foot artillery. Let's now have a look at the horse artillery. So let's fast forward in our battle. We've assumed that we've driven off the enemy artillery with our guns. Our brigade here is now advancing on the objective. These guys are still fighting around the BUA. And this brigade skirmish line has been reinforced by an independent light infantry battalion helping out. And there's a fight going on here. This brigade, the Russians have sent a Jaeger battalion forward to help out in the woods. And all this is happening here. The enemy, for their part, have decided they're going to send forward this infantry brigade on a redeploy order to threaten your flank. So they're going to start coming through here. So they're going to start forming columns and coming forward. So this is a situation now. The Russians, to counter the attack on your right, they're coming forward on their left. They've thrown this brigade into column and they're coming forward. Now let's talk about how we're going to counter this. And one of the things we're going to be using is our horse artillery. So, as you've only used 2 brigades so far, now's the time you commit your reserve. And one of those brigades you're going to commit is your cavalry brigade. And the reason you're going to do this is not only is cavalry scary, but if you're fortunate enough, you might have a horse artillery battery attached to the cavalry. And this is really important because cavalry is an impact troop. It can't reach out and touch its enemies. But if it has accompanying horse artillery, it can. And not only can it do that, but it can create a situation where the enemy, confronted with a double threat of both cavalry and artillery, can find themselves in the hurt locker big time. So here we see our cavalry brigade has come on from reserve and it's come forward with its horse artillery limbered coming along with it. As soon as the cavalry gets within 6 inches of this brigade's skirmish line, these guys are going to get scattered. They're going to withdraw, taking 1 CD casualties as they go away because the cavalry is scaring the bejesus out of them. So they're quickly driven in. That takes away the threat of skirmish fire onto your battery. The battery coming along is also now going to deploy. The infantry are in a real bind now. They either stay in column formation and just take their lumps and risk being charged by cavalry in column. Not too bad a situation, but not ideal. But they might form square because of the threat of the cavalry. Either way, when this artillery deploys, these battalions now, because they can't charge cavalry, the best they can do is advance towards the cavalry. The cavalry, in turn, threatens the infantry. If they form square, they're now going to be receiving artillery fire from this battery and suffering extra CDs for their efforts. If they stay in column, they're going to be suffering extra CDs for their efforts. So they're now in a very difficult situation. Cavalry versus infantry can be a handful, can be a problem. Cavalry versus infantry with artillery attached are really in the hurt locker because now what you can do is this artillery can fire into the enemy columns or squares because there's no way they're going to stay in line, especially with cavalry about. They're going to suffer more egregiously from the artillery, and the cavalry itself is actually doing nothing other than threatening the infantry. So the cavalry combined with the artillery can be a very potent force in the attack. So horse artillery should be kept limbered to move with the cavalry and then deployed at the point where the infantry are having to react to the presence of the cavalry. And the other thing about horse artillery, and this is its real versatility, there's nothing stopping you using it as just standard field artillery. So essentially it can do everything the field guns can do with the addition of being used aggressively in the offensive role when supporting cavalry. So now let's have a quick look and talk about artillery in defense. The main thing to know about artillery in defense is simply this: be consistent in your targeting. What my tactical recommendation is simply this: when a battery is firing, ensure that you fire consistently at one target until you get the desired effect. And by that, I mean simply reduce the enemy to warn. If 3 enemy infantry columns are advancing on your line, target 1 battalion and hammer them until they're worn. Once that's done, switch to another target. Rarely will you get a situation where you will be able to completely destroy one target with artillery fire. If it happens, if you're consistently rolling high, and they're coming on, and you can pour more and more fire into them, inferior artillery fire, then standard artillery fire, and then canister, and you can destroy them, that's great because you can falter the brigade. But if there are multiple targets, the worst thing you can do is keep switching from one target to the next and sharing the joy everywhere, where you only get 1 hit on these guys, 2 hits on these, maybe a bit of bounce through on them. What you want to do is concentrate on one target until it's at least worn. Once it's worn, by all means, switch to another target. And don't forget the bounce through. Bounce through fire is not only delivered via firing at inferior and standard ranges, but canister fire also produces bounce through. Lots of wargame rules do not give you bounce through fire with when you're firing canister, and I think this is a real flaw in some rules. Bounce through is a bit of a misnomer because what it really ought to be called is penetrative fire. So when batteries fire round shot, bounce through essentially means that the rounds are striking the ground just in front of the targeted infantry or cavalry. It then skips off the ground, bounces through at ankle height, knee height, waist height, chest height, head height, and then chest height, waist height, knee height, and so on until it gets all the way through the target unit and then hits the ground, bounces again, skips up, and repeats the process. Canister still has that same effect because often when artillery was fired, it was fired with round shot. You could have some guns double shotted, you could have some guns firing round shot, and some guns firing canister. Very rarely did all the guns in the battery all fire canister. Regardless, even if they were, canister fire will penetrate quite a long way. If it doesn't strike anyone, if the target is in line, for example, and it doesn't strike anyone in those first 3 ranks, that round shot is going to continue on to anyone who's unfortunate enough to be behind the target. So the penetrative effects of canister are there, not just, the penetrative effects of artillery fire are not just there for round shot, but they're also there for inverted air commas, canister fire as well. So that's artillery and defense. Concentration of fire is probably the most important thing that you should consider. Generally speaking in artillery, don't forget you have your caissons, and you have to decide, are you going to use them when batteries are worn to bring them from a worn status to only 4 casualties, or are you going to allow a battery that's carrying 4 casualties deliver artillery assault fire for a single turn? I personally use my canisters when batteries hit 6 casualties, and then I use the canister. I do this because it keeps the battery in the line longer. I'd rather have a battery in the line firing for a couple of more turns than 1 turn of assault fire. But it's 6 of one, half a dozen of another. You pays your price, and you take what you get. So that's this video covering foot artillery in the attack, horse artillery in the attack, and artillery in defense in general. Okay, so now what we're going to talk about, just before I wrap up, I did mention we will talk about why we don't bombard built-up areas with our artillery. There's a couple of reasons for that, and I should give it the caveat. Sometimes you will want to bombard a built-up area. Now, if you decide that you do not want to attack and seize the built-up area, then by all means, feel free to bombard the crap out of it, because there is a 1 in 6 chance that you could set the place on fire. And if you are receiving fire from the BUA as you're trying to bypass it, sometimes it's not a bad idea to set the place on fire. Also, just bombarding it in general. There's always a 50-50 chance that you'll cause 1 casualty every time you fire at the BUA. It should be noted, however, that you're only ever going to get weak fire into a BUA. This idea of smoothbore cannon shots eradicating built-up areas, it just didn't happen. The way BUAs were dealt with during the Napoleonic era is they either bypassed them or they stormed them with the bayonet. Very rarely did they just sit back and just shell the places. But if you do shell them, there is a chance, like I said, you could set it on fire. And if you set a side of the BUA on fire that you are attacking, that's a good thing, because that you're trying to bypass. That's a good thing because no fire can come out of the side of the BUA that is on fire. So long story short, by all means, if you feel you want to bombard a BUA because you're going to bypass it, you can do that. But also remember this, artillery is a finite resource, and every battery that you put to the task to bombard a BUA cannot be used to attrit enemy infantry, cavalry, or artillery. And also, I do recall when I was talking about caissons just prior to this, I was saying, you know, I won't commit a canister until I've got 6 casualties. Slip of the tongue. What I was saying is generally I do not commit caissons until my batteries are at 6 casualties. But that's not a hard and fast rule. I just want to stress that. Like I said, consult the book of words. It's on page 71 of the rule book. By all means, have a look there in regards to the use of caissons and make up your own mind what you, how you think they should be best put to use. But like I said, for me, I use them predominantly to relieve casualties on the battery. The caissons represent artificers repairing guns, guns that are held in reserve in the battery being brought forward, replacing guns that are destroyed, etc. So it's up to you what you want to do with them. So that's that. And that's artillery. Okay, my hard rocking amigos, that covers this tactical tips for GDA number 2. And we've discussed artillery, foot artillery in the attack, horse artillery in the attack, and artillery in defense. As I go forward, I'll probably have 3 topics per video. I hope you found that useful. If you've got any other questions, or if you think there's anything, you've noticed any obvious flaws in what I've suggested, you might think what my tactical advice is garbage, and that's fine. If you think so, please tell me that it's garbage, but also tell me why, because if I can learn something, that would be great, because I am not the font of all knowledge, and I could quite easily be giving you guys what we'd like to refer to the old days in the army as a bum drum. So let me know what you think. The next video in the series I'll do will be in relation to tactical tips on deployment, what to consider when deploying your divisions, individual brigades on the table. Other than that, I can't think of anything else to add. I hope you found this informative. Please like, share, and subscribe if you do find it helpful, because we'd like to get it out to as many people as we possibly can. The whole purpose of these videos is if you are a little bit more informed on how you should use your troops and deploy your troops and all that kind of good stuff, it makes for more exciting games. Nobody likes beaten harp seals, unless you're a Canadian harp seal farmer, I guess. But other than those guys, nobody really likes beaten harp seals. So with that in mind, like, share, and subscribe, provide some feedback, and I'll catch you on the next one. You be quiet.